Book 8 Summary. The next morning, Alcinous takes Odysseus to the assembly place. Athene, disguised as a herald, tells the captains and councillors to go to the assembly because there is a fit stranger there. Athene makes him look fitter to gain respect. Alcinous announces that they are going to help the stranger home. He sends 52 oarsmen to prepare the ship, whilst he invites the princes into the palace to entertain Odysseus. He summons Demodocus, who is helped into the room and given bread and wine, but no meat. Demodocus is a blind bard, and many think that this was a representation of Homer himself. Now, the authorship of the Odyssey is quite ambiguous, and it's very much debated amongst scholars. It could have been that Homer was one man who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, and potentially was blind, and that Demodocus is a way of him saying, sort of giving a shout out to the bards and to himself. However, it could have also been that multiple people composed the Odyssey. Also, this could have been in like a sort of throughout time. So that it could have been one man started it off, and then another person developed it. Then that was passed down a couple of generations, and it was adapted and developed further, etc., etc. However, Demodocus is possibly a representation of Homer. Alcinous makes many sacrifices for the feast. Sacrifices were the only time that the ancients could eat meat, so it was kind of a time of celebration as well as religious devotion, and it's a nice thing in Xenia to do for a guest if you've got the wealth to make a sacrifice. They eat whilst the bard sings about Odysseus' role in Troy. Odysseus cries but covers his face with his purple cloak. He notices, Alcinous notices, and suggests that they all go outside and show Odysseus how great the Phaeacians are at sport. They all go to the assembly, and Homer lists the names of the young competitors. This is generally irrelevant and hard to remember, and all it does is really demonstrate the Phaeacian prowess and masculinity. However, on the other hand, the Phaeacians are isolationist and so can only get to Kleos through sport rather than war. So despite the sort of perfect facade that they haven't got this heroism in war that other people such as Odysseus would respect. They race and Clytonius wins. They wrestle and Euryalus wins. They jump and Amphialus wins. They throw discus, Elatrius wins, and they box and Laodamas wins. Laodamas is Alcinous' son. He suggests that they ask Odysseus to compete too, because he is well built and not that old. Odysseus says that he's too sad and all he really wants to do is to get home. Euryalus insults Odysseus, saying that he is clearly no athlete and is gold digging through Xenia. This hurts Odysseus' Kleos, which is a bad move. Odysseus sasses or insults him in response, essentially calling Euryalus stupid, and then he says that his anger has made him want to compete. Without even bothering to remove his cloak, he throws the heaviest discus further than any of the Phaeacians throws. They even have to duck, and Athene, who is hidden in the crowd, comments on Odysseus' skill, which just further draws attention to this phenomenal man that is in their midst, and they're so confused by him. He basically says, beat that, and then says he'd take them at boxing, wrestling, or running, except for Laodamas, because it is bad to fight a host. He says that he is great at archery and javelin, and says that he wouldn't win at running just because his legs are weak from the rough seas. This reference to archery is a hint to his identity, because he was renowned for being a phenomenal archer in Troy, and the only person that's better was Philoctetes. So, this is just potentially they could work out his identity, but it's still quite vague. Alcinous acknowledges Odysseus' Kleos, but wants Odysseus to remember the Phaeacians well. He says that they're good at running, they're seamen, they like the feast, the lyre, the dance, changing clothes, baths, and their beds. This is all very civilised, but again it's sheltered, there is no influence of warfare, they're not very heroic, which in this situation is really what we respect. So while they're wealthy and civilised, they're not that great. He tells the dancers to perform, and the stewards sweep the floor, and a squire gets a lyre. Demodocus begins to sing about Ares and Aphrodite while some boys dance, and Odysseus is filled with admiration. So now we're going to have sort of a mini story, like a myth within the epic, all about Ares and Aphrodite. So Ares and Aphrodite had an affair in Hephaestus' palace. Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus. Ares is the god of warfare, Aphrodite is the goddess of love and beauty, and Hephaestus is the god of metalwork. And he is also god of physical disability. So the sun saw the affair and told Hephaestus, and in anger he designed a snare, or a net, and attached it to the bed. He pretended to leave for the town of Lemnos so that Ares, who had been keeping watch, went into the palace. He and Aphrodite began having sex and were caught in the net. The sun told Hephaestus and he returned, and he said that Aphrodite never loved him because he was lame, he wished he'd never been born, and he wanted back all of the gifts that he'd given Zeus to get her. So obviously Zeus is Aphrodite's father, and in order to get her hand in marriage and the permission from Zeus for this to happen, he gave gifts. He called to the other gods, who spectated and burst into laughter. Apollo jokingly asked Hermes if he'd still shag her, and he says he definitely would. I apologise for some of my language here. It's when I made this, I was trying to make the revision slightly more fun or interesting. So if this offends you, I do apologise. So yeah, Apollo and Hermes are acting like sort of lads at school or something. They're very joking around. This is again showing the sort of human characteristics of the gods rather than a sort of transcendent divine character. Poseidon told Hephaestus to let Ares go and that he would personally see to it that the fine was paid, a fine for having an affair. Reluctantly, Hephaestus undid the chains and let them go. Ares fled to Thrace and Aphrodite to Cyprus. This again represents a double standard, because she, as a woman, she bathes, she gets nice clothes, whereas Ares is blamed and has to pay a fine. So we're seeing that women are never to blame, because surely they won't have any sexual urges of their own. Of course not. And it's always the men that seduce them. Again, this is why Helen of Troy is accepted back by Menelaus. Not only is Aphrodite blamed for this seduction, but also is clearly no fault of Helen's, because Paris is the seducer. It's one aspect of patriarchy that actually kind of benefits the woman in one sense. After the song, Alcinous tells Helios and Laodamas to dance by themselves. They take a purple ball and do their dance. So these are the two best dancers. Odysseus praises them because it is very beautiful. Alcinous tells the 12 princes, 13 if you include Alcinous, and he tells them to give him Xenia gifts. He then tells Euryalus to apologise and give his own gift, which he does, and Odysseus accepts. Back at the palace, Alcinous tells Arete to bring a coffer and fill it with clothes, and her own gifts. Then heat water for a bath. Arete sends her maids and adds a cloak and a tunic of her own accord to the gift. Alcinous' gift will be a golden chariot. Odysseus bathes, and then after he's dressed again, Nausicaa comes in, wishes him luck, and reminds him that it was she who saved his life, and he says that he will pray to her like a divinity. Alcinous and Odysseus feast, and Demodocus is brought back, and Odysseus tells a squire to give him meat, because bards are very important. Again, perhaps this is Homer making a self-serving statement about the importance of bards. In fact, Odysseus gives him the best loin of the pork. So he actually gives him the best of the meat, which bards don't usually get that sort of treatment in a feast because they are the paid entertainment. So yeah, the fact that Odysseus does this is sort of a big praise of bards, and so it could be Homer making this statement. He tells him to sing about the Trojan horse, and if he is accurate, Odysseus will spread the word of his greatness. Demodocus sings about the horse and the pillaging of Troy, and Odysseus cries again, which is described with a very dramatic simile. Now Alcinous stops Demodocus and asks where Odysseus is from, so that they can take him home. He asks to explain why he's crying and to tell him about his travels. So finally, Xenia allows this questioning, this isn't rude anymore because he's done everything, Alcinous had done everything he needs to before he asked this question. And to be honest, Odysseus is pretty much asking for it, because when he asks to sing about the Trojan horse, which was Odysseus's idea, and then he says, if you're accurate, I'll spread the word about your greatness, suggests that he knows about the accuracy of the Trojan horse. Therefore, perhaps it's Odysseus. So, yeah, this is the right time to ask him his identity. Anyway, that is the end of Book 8 on a bit of a cliffhanger. Thanks for listening. There will be more coming soon.